Sick and Tired Part 2 is absolutely incredible, and it has one of the best written scenes ever. And I will talk about this when we go through the episode. This is the second episode of the 5th season of The Golden Girls. It's, of course, directed by Terry Hughes. And as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And I'm trying to not get too emotional because it's not so much that the episode itself is emotional, but what it's doing is so incredible and so important that I have nothing but love and respect for this episode. This obviously picks up where the previous episode left off, where Dorothy was having symptoms that didn't point to a specific condition. Doctors were telling her, you're just getting old, you're depressed. They weren't taking her seriously. But now it's time for a change. And the episode, I have to say, it's very, very funny with some amazing performances. But in between the comedy, and even saying that, the more serious moments still have comedy in them, but there are some really significant aspects to this episode. It starts off with Dorothy smashing the Play-Doh. She's visiting her friend, Dr. Harry Weston, who's a paediatrician. He's played by Richard Mulligan, and he believes her. He doesn't know what condition Dorothy has, but he believes that she's not just getting old and it's not just part and parcel of aging. And it's a very funny interaction. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. It was really engaging. And we're then back at the house. Rosa's making omelettes without yolk. And Dorothy is about to go and see the specialist with Sophia, and Blanche comes in. And Rue McClanahan's performance is always fantastic, but in this episode, and this scene in particular, it was just absolutely sensational. She has been awake for 72 hours, she has written a masterpiece, but she's exhausted and a little bit delirious, and her performance was absolutely incredible. She feels like she's hallucinating, and she picks up the bag that contains the egg yolks. And she says, I see little balls of sunshine in a bag, which is just phenomenal. And she points out that the great artists are understood, and she's going to cut off her hair like Vincent van Gogh. They point out that it was his ear he cut off, to which she responds, I have too many earrings, which I loved. Absolutely fantastic. We then go to see the specialist, and the very first thing we hear is Sophia saying, I want you to know I'm crazy about Chinese people, which is just so random, and obviously cutting through the more serious aspect of the episode with some great comedy there. The doctor's response, his facial expressions, I loved. He's Dr. Chang, played by Keone Young, and he's a fabulous character, and he tells Dorothy, and this is partly when I start to get emotional again, that she has chronic fatigue syndrome. And I learned something in this episode, and I learned that it only started to exist. And I say started to exist because it's not as if day one the condition gets a name and day two everybody knows about it. It's obviously a gradual process, even within the medical field. But the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, only introduced chronic fatigue syndrome as a term in 1988. And this episode aired in 1989. And that is an absolutely amazing thing that the episode is doing. They're taking this newly defined condition and raising awareness for it. And basically saying there are probably many, many people who have this condition, but doctors don't know about it. They're not taking it seriously. Let's make people aware about it. And Dr. Chang actually explained, and I thought this was really beautifully put, he explained some doctors just have difficulty believing it exists because they can't see it under a microscope. And I thought that was so powerful. And let's be honest, that's not unique to chronic fatigue syndrome. There are many conditions where if it's not obvious, if it can't be proved with a specific test, a blood test, for example, then this is going to be a lot more difficult for doctors to either believe or to think about. And I'd like to think that 30-something years later, chronic fatigue syndrome is more well known, but there are always going to be new conditions for which there may not be a specific medical test, at least when it's first defined. And this is always going to be an ongoing thing. And I think the episode did a great job of showing that sometimes some medical professionals need more concrete proof to believe that a condition exists. And I think the episode just did such an important job with this, specifically with chronic fatigue syndrome, particularly as it's such a new term at the time. And it's just absolutely incredible that they decided to do this. And we're then back at the house. Blanche gets a rejection, and she gets another rejection letter, and she says to Rose, "I'm so mad I could scream." And within about 2 seconds, she does. She screams. And Rose had the exact same reaction that I did. Nobody ever screams after they say that, but Blanche did. And it was brilliant, really brilliant performance. And then Blanche insults Rose some more with being from Minnesota. And Rose says all the right things to support Blanche and to make her feel better, but then really lays into Blanche about how people from Minnesota aren't stupid and they do have value. And it was really lovely, and I rather enjoyed that quite a lot. And then we have the final scene, and this is so powerful, so incredible. They're at a restaurant, and the waiter or the maitre d' asks, "What are we celebrating?" And Sophia says, "My Dorothy found out she has a debilitating disease," which obviously out of context sounds ridiculous, but of course what Sophia means is finally they've taken her seriously and have been able to identify the cause of her symptoms, which in itself is great because now she can know certain steps that she can take to ease those symptoms. And they're chatting about it and talking about it, and they suggest calling it Zbornak syndrome, which from now on is what I'm going to think about when I hear the term chronic fatigue syndrome. And it turns out that one of the doctors who told her that she wasn't sick was at that restaurant. And on the one hand, I don't necessarily agree with Dorothy doing this in the restaurant, but at the same time, it played out so beautifully that I don't blame her. She stands up and walks over to the doctor, and she said, "You told me I wasn't sick. Maybe I was just getting old." And he replies, "Sorry, I don't remember." To which Dorothy responds, "Maybe you're getting old," which I just thought was brilliant. And she gives this beautiful monologue about how she went to him scared and sick, and he dismissed her. And there's so much substance in what she says about how some doctors will dismiss patients because there's not a clear-cut diagnosis. There's not something, as the previous doctor said, that can be seen under a microscope, and how he didn't treat her with the care he should have done. And she said some potentially cruel things about how every doctor, specifically this doctor, should get sick at some point so they can feel that fear. But I think it's a valid point, maybe a bit harsh, but certainly a valid point. And it's just so beautifully written and so powerful and so moving and so significant. Significant then, significant today. And it's, in my opinion, one of the most important, powerful, moving scenes, not just in the Golden Girls, but in anything, any TV show, any film. Dorothy is basically speaking on behalf of the hundreds, thousands, maybe millions of people, I don't know, who have gone to a doctor and the doctor has dismissed the seriousness of their situation, maybe even dismissed them completely out of hand, as Dorothy experienced. And for anybody who's been through it, for anybody who might ever go through it, that scene, I think, was written for them. Also written in part for medical professionals who might be, like that doctor, quick to dismiss the patient because it's not a textbook condition. It's not something that fits the perfect mold. Maybe it's a condition that hasn't got a name yet and they're easy to dismiss out of hand, or it's easier to dismiss them out of hand than it is to dig a little bit deeper and find out truly what's wrong. And that's obviously what Dorothy experienced. And it's just so incredible and so emotional. And I thank the show so much for doing such an amazing job with this. And Dorothy then goes back to the table. And I will admit, I hate the ending because it made me feel really uncomfortable and I don't agree with it. I hated the ending. Not enough to spoil the episode, but it made me feel uneasy, and I kind of wish they hadn't done that because otherwise the episode would have been perfect. At the end, they realised that they'd asked for the best champagne, and Rose points out that the champagne costs $430 a bottle, and Sophia makes a scene, spits out the champagne, makes it seem like it's revolting, and they're obviously not going to charge them for this because how dare they serve them disgusting champagne. And I thought, okay, that's horrible, that's not a great thing to do. But they then say, well, at least let us cover the cost of your meal. And that it just made me feel uneasy. It's a con, and I don't agree with it, and I don't like it, and I don't support it. And it just made me feel a little bit uneasy. So I don't love the ending. In fact, I absolutely hate the ending. But the rest of the episode is so perfect, so golden, that I can't fault the rest of it. It's absolutely incredible. I was looking forward to this episode because I was keen to find out what was wrong with Dorothy. I was keen to find out if she had a specific condition. And this may sound horrible, but I hoped she did because I didn't want it to be true that she was just getting old and the doctors were right to dismiss her. And I'm so glad that they took the direction they did. It's so powerful, so important. The ending aside, so perfect. Sick and Tired Part 2 is, without question, one of the most incredible episodes of The Golden Girls. It's absolutely fantastic.